Thank you so much, Cam. That's an amazing sort of introduction. I'll try to live up to those expectations. So let me know if you can see this. I'm sharing my screen. It should be visible, I guess. The so as I let me start, maybe just give you a quick introduction for myself as well. Like I know Cam sort of already talked a little bit about things that we've done in the past. What I'm doing today is I am the product leader for a service within Azure AI, specifically called Document Intelligence, right? And Document Intelligence is a product that allows you to extract information from documents. Again, it's a small shameless plug. That's sort of what I thought Cam was inviting me here to talk about. But if you have any documents and you need to process them, those would be the ways that you could go about doing this, right? So extracting information, whether that be sort of structure, as well as sort of content that you want, maybe like as you're thinking about like building applications that take in submissions of forms, extracting that information, putting that into a database. Those would be the common kinds of patterns that we expect to solve using AI. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like how we got here, right? When Cam first reached out and said like, hey, I want you to see if you'd be open to talking about product management for applied AI, right? And I was like, immediately, I'm like, okay, so document intelligence used to be a product called Form Recognizer. Earlier, within Microsoft, we had a sort of cognitive services and applied AI branding. And so we used to be an applied AI service because essentially what we do is we are taking computer vision sort of algorithms, like that'd be OCR, as well as all the other models that we have around extracting information from documents, and then using those as a applied AI service to extract information from documents. And I thought, hey, Cam, this is great. I can definitely do this. This is awesome, right? And so I came prepared to talk about things like like, hey, getting to MVP is easy, right? So like, it's not hard to get to an MVP. What happens next is actually the real problem when you're building a service, right? And then how do you deal with things like, internally, I've been sort of within my team, we've sort of thought about this a lot because we do a lot of applied AI, and we've sort of recognized that there's this three epoch rule that we sort of apply to everything we do, right? And the three epoch rule is um, you have three iterations of a particular feature to nail it. If you can't nail a proper use case within three iterations, you probably need to rethink this whole thing from the ground up, right? And so we've sort of like used this three epoch rule as a way for us to say, like, there's a pitch count, and you have to manage that pitch count, and you have to prioritize the right things and make sure that you get this done, right? And so that was sort of like, those are some of the ideas that I was planning to talk about, at least, right? And then last week, Cam and I sort of had this discussion, and he goes, well, we really want to talk about tools, right? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because tools is a little bit more challenging for us because um, I work a lot with enterprise customers, and sort of like part of the enterprise promise from Azure is that your data stays within Azure, and so we have this strict guidelines in terms of like what we can use, what we can't use, and how we can use customer data and things like that, right? So this is all sort of like very sort of streamlined and set, right? And so there's not a lot of tools that I thought we can talk about. So what I thought was like, okay, I need to pivot, right? So, and that's you and I, we're all product managers. What do we do well? We pivot, right? And so that's sort of where we are at today. And I thought, okay, what is the core value proposition from this conversation that I can share with you, right? And I hope that this is a conversation. It shouldn't be a presentation, because everything that I'm sharing with you today is intended to sort of like uh, be an example of things that we've done. I'm going to share some learnings, and I'm also expecting that you're going to help me understand what I could be doing better, and what ideas I could take from this conversation back into things that I'm talking about. So I'm going to share a little bit about some of the tools we've built in-house in order to sort of align with this problem, right? And the biggest challenge that we have today is our signal to noise ratio, right? Is we're getting bombarded with information from a variety of different sources, right? And what we need to do is essentially figure out what are the core problems we absolutely have to focus on, and what parts of the problems are ones that we can, I don't want to say ignore, but with a fixed bandwidth and a fixed ability to sort of like drive change, as a product manager, our goal is number one prioritization, right? If I send my engineering team down a rabbit hole that is the wrong rabbit hole to send them down, that can cost me years, because now I have a GA service that's going to be living for 3 years, that's going to be supported and updated. And if we make one small mistake and we say like, hey, this is a problem we need to go solve, and it is not the right problem, we've essentially burned a significant amount of capital or capacity within the team to do anything more interesting in the future. And so as we look at this, right, so we get a lot of signals from a variety of different places, right? So we have an email distribution list that customers can send us questions on, and that's it's called Form Recognizer Contact Us. So if you ever use the product and you want to reach out to us, that's how you do it. And then we also have a studio experience, right? So there's the Document Intelligence Studio, where you can go try out our product and sort of like experiment with it and build out your solution. But you can also give us some feedback in that, right? Then there's support tickets, right? So support tickets are essentially every customer that uses Azure has access to Azure support. They can send us a support ticket, and that's something we need to work on and work through. So there's this plus all the other customer conversations that we have on a periodic basis, right? So every day, each of our product managers on the team essentially has a commitment of saying, like, I'm going to go talk to at least X number of customers, try to understand what I can get from them, and then also look at competition and try to figure things out from that as well. So as we think about this challenge, right? So what we need to do is really understand how we can harness some of the signal that's coming in from all these different sources and apply that to sort of our prioritization process to say, what do we want to actually focus on? And so I'll pause and see, is anything I'm saying sort of relevant to anybody else in the room? And like, do you feel like this is a classic problem, or is this like, oh, this is an interesting problem, but it's not necessarily something that we really worry about too much?
That's resonating for me.
Okay,
But
awesome.
I'm just one guy.
Yeah, one guy. One guy is better than nobody. So that's always better. Like, sample size of 1 is still better than sample size of 0. Cool. So I'll keep going, right? So one of the things that we do is we have processes in place where we are expected to sort of review as product managers. We have a sort of a process that everything that comes in needs to get reviewed, like support cases. Every support case that comes in, there's a product manager on our team who we take turns doing this, and it's a rotation where we essentially review all the support cases and try to understand, like, okay, what was the customer problem? How was it resolved? Did we provide the customer with the right guidance? Was the right answer provided back to the customer? If not, what improvements do we need to make in order to not have this happen in the future, right? So that's sort of like one aspect of what we do. Similarly, with the emails that come in, one of us will respond, and like, depending on like sort of area of expertise, we pick things up and we'd respond, right? So we've got all this historical information sitting there now. So we've got a ton of data that we've done this for years, right? So we've got all this insight that we're sitting on. And so what we attempted to do was really take all of this thing and create this curated data set down at the bottom of the screen, right? This curated data set is essentially it's the question that was asked, it's the answer that was provided, and it was some metadata around the answer to say, like, okay, it came in through these channels, it was this type of customer, it was this type of thing, right? So all the metadata that we can generate about these things, right? Or these events. And what we're doing now is we're actually trying to take the input that comes in directly. So the next time somebody asks us a question on either a email or in the studio, what we're doing is we're actually running that through the RAG pattern, right? And if you're not familiar with the RAG pattern, it's retrieval augmented generation. It's a way for you to take sort of some context, apply that sort of context to the question that's coming in, and send that into the language model, get a response back from the language model, and use that as the output, right? So let's take a simple example, right? You're in the studio, you are trying to set some things up, and you get a internal server error, right? Hypothetically, that's a bad situation, but you get a high internal server error, right? You can ask the question. Well, maybe internal server error is not a good thing, but maybe you're trying to train a model. The model accuracy is not really good. Like, it's a low accuracy thing, right? And you ask the question, hey, what can I be doing to improve the accuracy of my model? So the answers to the question are in a variety of different sources. So it's in the documentation, It's in things that we've sent to other customers as responses in the past. It's in support cases, as well as the responses that have been provided in the support cases. And so what we're trying to do right now is really harness all that information and use that to generate a response from the model, right? And so this process is sort of broken down into 3 steps. The first step, the first thing that we do is we try to categorize this thing, right? Is to say, what kind of a problem is this, right? And we have a few different categories of problems, right? Like is it a problem building the model? Is it a problem with the API? Is it, so there's a variety of places that you can go to. The next thing we're trying to do is score it, right? And we score it on a score of frequency as well as severity, right? So severity we get from support cases. It's easy to get the severity. From emails and from other things like that, it's harder to generate some severity. So we're using some prompt-based things to try to generate some severity on some of those things, right? To say like, okay, if this is a customer that has this kind of problem, do you think that they can actually build a model? If they can, then it's probably not as severe. If they really can't even build a model, then we're probably in a position where it's probably a little bit more severe than others, right? So we're trying to do some things around that to try to produce a output that tells us like, what do we need to do with this, right? Is it a improvement to the docs? Is it something that we add to the backlog? Or is it just a thing that you need a human triage, right? So there probably is we also have a triage process, because essentially everything that we do is a little bit more complex. Documents tend to be super complex. It's not as simple as, if you're using computer vision and you send an image in, images are fairly sort of consistent in how they're laid out. And so there's really not much variation in those images that causes in the formats or how they're built and things like that is what I'm talking about, not the content of the image, right? But documents can be much more complex. And so we have a triage process where we go through this, right? And so what we're trying to do is really say, how do we go through this process and how do we triage this to the point where we can get the customer a adequate response? So let's talk a little bit about the results, right? It's magical, but that's only magical when it works, right? There is actually a huge gap between what we started with as our expectation to what we actually have working. And so what we found that it's easy to address the low-hanging fruit, right? So the repeat cases, the ones where somebody asks you the same sort of question in a variety of different channels, or a similar question that is sort of contextually very similar to things that were asked in the past. Those are the ones that we can actually absolutely knock out of the park. It's not hard to do, but it's the ones where it tends to be more nuanced. It's specific about a document that they're working with. It's specific about a specific problem that they're dealing with. Those are the ones that are really challenging for this sort of a process, right? So in terms of like how the process performs, I'd say paradoxically, you think that it's a productivity tool and it should help you be more productive, but sometimes it feels like you're spending more time babysitting the tool than actually doing the work, right? And so what we are constantly sort of trying to figure out is to say like how efficient is this process, in the sense, like, are we able to take 30% of our cases and just automate them end to end? Is it 20%? Is it less? We're not sure, right? Right now, it's probably somewhere in that range. It's not even like 30%. It's probably closer to 20 or 15%, I would say. But our goal is that over a period of time, as we get better with this, as we start building this out a little further, we can start getting to the point where we can do this more effectively and more efficiently across a wider variety of cases, right? But some of the other things that we're also seeing is it's a great onboarding tool, right? As I have new product managers join the team, it's great for them to just ask questions, right? So they can go ask questions against this data set and say like, hey, like I was in a conversation with the customer, and I might be in a conversation with the customer, and I can just ask the question that, they're saying that this particular feature doesn't work in this particular version of the API, right? And the answer is like, yes, it won't work in that API because they have to upgrade to this version of the API, or it will work if they do these 5 things, right? So I think some of those sorts of sort of the side screen, it really helps with that for some of the folks who are new or joining the team, right? So that's some of the advantages or some of the ways that we think it's going to help us moving forward as we continue to evolve the process. So essentially, that's really what I wanted to talk about today, and kind of give you a quick overview of like, hey, here's some of the tools we're using. May not be something that you can absolutely use as is, but it just gives you an idea of like, if you were trying to structure something similar to this in the environments that you work in, here's some of the things that you might want to consider as you go through this process. That's all I have, and I'll pause there and I'll see if there's any questions. I'd love to see if there's any if anybody's tried something similar or something different. I'd love to hear what your experience has been with this process or similar problems like this.
Awesome. Thank you, Vinod. If you guys have questions, since there's so many people in the room, it might be a good idea if you just use the reactions to raise your hand, and we'll just pick people off as those questions come in. No questions.
No questions. Wow.
I got a quick one, I guess. I mean,
There you go.
you talked a little bit about RAG there.
Yeah.
Where have you seen it work well, and where have you seen it not work well? I've got some experience using sort of that methodology, and I've gotten sort of mixed results, especially when you start dealing with things that are maybe where you have to perform calculations, where maybe generative AI is not really so good at that. Where have you guys found it be beneficial or not be beneficial?
I think the beneficial part, let me put it, rather than beneficial and non-beneficial, I'll try to answer the question as effective versus non-effective, right? Because I think beneficial, yes, it is beneficial in a variety of different ways, right? The question really is it effective, right? And I think I'm hoping that's what you're trying to ask as well, right? So in the effective part, I would say I see it really effective in smaller documents that are somewhat homogeneous, right? Because the ability of the large language model to actually comprehend, if you think about what the large language model is, it's essentially compressing information. It's compressing all the knowledge that it's been trained on into that single model, right? And so for it to use that compression algorithm on your data set that you're asking it to and answer the question, it's great, right? As we were sort of preparing for this, you and I were talking about ChatGPT and using ChatGPT for coding. The reason ChatGPT is that good at coding is because generating code is a highly repetitive task, right? There is very little variance in the input or the output because your code has to compile and it has to work, and so it has to conform to a specific structure, specific schema, and so those are the scenarios where it works really well, right? The ones where your data is highly variant and it's a mixture of different things, somewhat like what we're dealing with, like for example, support cases, right? So a support case can have a variety of different things in it, and it could be, like you could be attaching documents, so how do you understand all of those things? And I think that's one of the challenges that we see, at least in terms of like how we can get these things to work effectively. The other thing I feel is context window also matters. In terms of like the tokens that you can send in, the more you can send in, the better, because that just makes the process more effective and at being able to process the information. But I'll also say the bigger challenge that we see today, at least with the tools that we're building and with the tools that we're using right now, at least, is it does require a significant amount of pre-processing. Like we actually have to spend some time sort of aligning these things in a way that it makes sense. So it's not as simple as just saying like I can dump emails, documentation, and everything else into a single data set and generate this, right? So you have to do some amount of pre-processing to actually make this work effectively. That's sort of the experience that I've had, at least.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
So a question from the chat. What is your strategy with introducing AI low-hanging fruit? There is a line between the danger of increasing scope with increasing speed to delivery. Example may be training engineers on AI coding tools like Microsoft versus Copilot.
I'm not sure I
Visual
understood the
Studio.
question. Yes.
Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Right?
Oh gosh, sorry.
or
Thank
IDE.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction, Stephen. I apologize.
No worries. No worries.
Steve, sorry. Can you repeat the question? Like what maybe I
Yeah,
did.
so here's a problem that always occurs, specifically for the product owners, is they're managing velocity of that of that engineering team,
Mhm.
right? You've got a full list, you've got your velocity, but there's things that can really reduce that friction or increase your time to delivery, decrease your time to delivery, I should say. Something might be Visual Studio code, right? And in there leveraging Copilot or leveraging something else to speed up that code or
Yeah.
speed up that testing, right? And from a product perspective, that can be viewed as an increase in scope. From a product perspective, that could be, increasing the velocity of your team within your agile release train, right? So there's a magic that product owners do to build in efficiency in with your team, right? You have to be a skilled product owner to do that. And what's your strategy around topics like that? I'm sure you run into it.
That's actually an interesting question. I will confess that I don't have a good answer for you.
That's
The
fine.
reason I don't have a good answer for you is probably structural, right? Within our teams, we typically aspire to have a 1 to 10 ratio between product managers and devs, right? So for every product manager, there's at least a 10 dev team that we're working with. That is actually not true. We're probably over leveraged to a certain extent. Like we've got a significantly higher ratio of engineers to product managers right now. So as a result, our product managers do not typically and our engineers don't want us to be telling them like what tools to use and what tools not to use either, right?
Yeah.
So they our sort of process typically of how we do this is we define what is the sort of scope of what we're trying to do. So we write a one pager of saying this is what we want to build. Like this is the problem statement. These are the customers. This is how they are describing the problem. This is the output that we want to be able to generate in order to alleviate this problem, right? And then it's an engineer or a data scientist, depending on what they So typically our process is we work with a research team that tries to figure out what problems they can solve, and then the engineers take those and actually commercialize them into a solution. And then as a team, we sort of ship that as a product, right? So once we are done defining the problem and defining sort of the parameters under which the teams work, they're free to go choose whatever tools they want to make things happen. And we typically don't want to get involved with that, because the more you get involved with that, the more they want to pull you in, and that stops you from being outward focused.
Right. Yeah, that line kind of comes where they got a full backlog and there's risk that they could, slow down their velocity in order to do that training. So yeah, no worries. That was a good answer.
Yep. Sorry, that's the best I can give you.
You got a enterprise architect asking product manager stuff. You got to give me give me a little buffer. Might not be appropriate.
Thanks for your question, Stephen. Aisha, did you want to go next? And I hope I said your name correctly. I apologize if I didn't get it right.
Oh, Steve or Stevenson. Oh, the other one.
Yeah, it's me. Yes, that you spelled it right. Yeah, sure. So this was my question. I mean, it's an interesting use case wherein Microsoft is building a product to do the product management. So how is that product different from the market leaders that we already have, which are integrating AI capabilities into them, such as Jira and the PMP products? Atlassian is also including the AI capabilities in its boards for task tracking. So how is Microsoft's PMP product? It's going to be different from the other products.
Good question. I probably did not do a good job at this, but I should probably clarify. This is not a product that we're building as a product that we expect to commercialize. Like this is just me giving you an example of tools we're building internally for ourselves to help us with the processes that we deal with, right? So it's not intended to say this is a Microsoft product that's going to be available for customers to use in the future. That is not what I intended to say. I'm sorry if that came across that way. In terms of how this is different from tools that are commercially available today, you're right. It is probably not any different, right? I think what you'll find, at least what my experience has been so far is a lot of the tools that you see today tend to be single domain focused, right? So if you go look at like support, right, you'll see that there's a lot of like ServiceNow kind of support case management kind of tools, but they're really focused on the domain of support management and things like that. Then you're looking at like how do you manage your backlogs? How do you manage your what is your product sort of profile, and how are you building that? There's a ton of tools that do that, right? But as a product manager, I feel like you're constantly shifting context, right? And that shift of context is expensive. And what we're trying to do here internally is really say, how do we start making this sort of really simple, right? And I think if you think about one of the aha moments for me, at least, was as you look at ChatGPT, right? One of the biggest benefits of ChatGPT is zero UX, right? It is a simple chat box that you can ask the question and you can get some answers, right? It doesn't work for all scenarios. It doesn't work for everything. But I think it's a great way for us to sort of speed up internal tools where you don't have to build a costly UX. You can essentially build a chat box, and that's the only UX you really need to enable productivity.
Yeah, in terms of prompts, ChatGPT is extending the use cases to summarize the content and to do the predictive analytics, and also to do the market research, and any tool that is in the market, the popular tools such as Jira or Asana, Crayon, Market Muse are all integrating this capabilities into their own product, so that customers don't deviate and don't see ChatGPT as an alternative. Instead, they're providing that feature within their own console.
Yep.
And I think this is what we have been seeing with the coding platforms as well, such as GitHub's Copilot, and also Visual Studio Code's autocomplete feature for coding in Java or Python or front end.
Yeah, it's fairly obvious, right? Like most everybody wants you to be sort of task focused, and they want you to feel like you can complete the task that you're intending to complete within their product or their tool set. Because anything that you have to jump out of that experience and go do something else is a risk of you not coming back, right? And so part of the product management sort of approach that every one of these organizations, us including, is taking is really thinking about, like, how do you complete a scenario end to end within your product workflow without having to have your users jump out of your product, go do something else, and then come back in, because the risk is pretty high that once they jump back out, they may not come back in to finish up, or they might just go choose a different solution. And so obviously that's something that every product manager has to worry about. But I don't necessarily see anybody who has solved this really well, at least with the kinds of problems that we're dealing with, like, and the tools that we have access to. I've not necessarily seen a good solution for what we were looking for.
Sure. Thank you for your insights, Vinod.
Absolutely. Thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Aisha. David, why don't you go next?
All right. Hi, Vinod. David Espindola here. So my question is around this customer service self-help domain. So anyone that has tried to use a chatbot with, a airline or a telecom, these chatbots are absolutely useless, right?
Yeah.
They don't go any further than maybe one or two steps.
Yeah.
And my hypothesis is that, in the last 2 decades, we've created a lot of CRM and ERP systems, and companies have a lot of data. Knowledge management is huge. And my hypothesis is that with LLMs and Gen AI, I was expecting to see a lot of improvement in these chatbots. But based on what you just said, that you found easy to deal with the low-hanging fruit, but the more nuanced, complex kinds of questions are really hard. Is my hypothesis wrong? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I can give you my opinion. I feel like there's it's a problem that's solvable. I'm hopeful that large language models actually are going to be a thing that are going to help with this problem. There is still a ongoing debate of, do you need a fine-tuned large language model? Can you solve it just with prompting? I think there are still a variety of different use cases that need to be sort of tested and validated before we can actually say that there's a clear winner in how these things work, right? Having said that, if you think about chatbots from say GPT, for me is like this like ADBC kind of date sort of event, right? Like if you think about before large language models existed, the way chatbots had to work was you had to, as a programmer, you had to define a set of intents, and each time a question came in, it would go through some sort of a classification process to identify which of those intents this question met, and then you're trying to figure out how do you route that based on knowing that what the intent is. And then you use some sort of NLP to say okay, I can extract some things like saying, okay, this is the customer name, this is the flight number that they were on, this is the bag code that they had issues with, and then you can take that and pass it down to an appropriate API on the back end to say hey, go solve this problem, right? I think that that method of thinking is restrictive in the fact that you have to have defined all the parameters or all the options that any possible person could come to you with, and you have to have defined it in a way that it knows what the parameters are that it needs to accept in order to service that request. And I don't think that's viable, right? There is really no way that you can think through what all those permutations and combinations are. But I think there's a second aspect to this, right? Which is, yes, the large language models are able to extract this information better, right? But it doesn't solve your secondary problem to say how do you solve this problem, even if you know what the intent is, right? And I think that's the level of improvement that you're probably going to need to see from a lot of these backend systems that know how to deal with these kinds of things, for sort of that magical experience to come forward, where you get off a flight, you don't see your suitcase, and you just start chatting, and you ask the question like, hey, where's my suitcase? And then it knows that, okay, your suitcase wasn't actually loaded on that flight, and it's still sitting in a room in airport XYZ, whatever that thing is, and it'll tell you oh, actually, we're going to reroute it, and it's going to show up, and it's going to get delivered to you 2 days late. That experience, I think it's going to still take some time and effort for organizations to sort of re-architect their systems to deal with some of these kinds of challenges.
Okay, so there is hope, is what I'm hearing, and it sounds like it's more a question of refining these models, fine-tuning. We don't need any new breakthroughs to actually get to that point, right?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, again, right? I think it's still early days, right? So it's still super early. A lot of customers that are actually using GPT and other sort of large language models today are really thinking through what those use cases are and how can they be successful implementing this, right? And so as they do this and as they learn and as they get better with it, they're going to be able to expand their horizons and go pick up more and more complex things. And I think that's sort of the journey that everybody's going to be on in the next few years.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no
Thanks,
problem.
David. All right. Well, so the questions are lining up. We've got a couple
I'll
in
stop
the
talking
chat,
about it.
and then we have Sai up next, and then we have Sahar after that, and then Rashid, and then Jay-Z. So let's start with Sai. You said you have a question about the training data pipeline.
Yeah. So Vinod, this is great presentation, by the way. Thank you so much. I'll try to keep this quick. So I'm a product manager who happened to work in the distributed data spaces and ML infrastructure. When I started working, I'm trying to give some context before I ask my question. So when I was in the early career, when I was working on XGBoost kind of models, it was easy for me to prepare the data collection and training data for my ML engineers. Then I moved to the deep learning models. It was a little challenging than the XGBoost model to prepare this training data or training data collection for this engineers. I'm just curious, while you're building this kind of application based upon the GPT, do you guys have to reinvent the wheel in terms of like, or your engineering team has to do a lot of heavy lift to build this kind of infrastructure to train the models and ship the product faster? Um, I mean, is the velocity of deliverables little different than your previous projects? Because now you have to do something little different to build this, to train this models and get some output out, if it makes sense, what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think what you're asking is like with large language models, does it change your shipping velocity? Can you give us?
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
I think it depends, right? The depends answer uh, is your product based on the large language model, or is it based on sort of uh, other technology that you're using, right? So let me give you an example. You could be using large language models in a variety of different ways, right? So you could say, okay, I'm going to build an API that uses the large language model that essentially does something, right? You could say, I'm going to use my large language model as a pre-labeling step for all of my training data sets to go through and use that as essentially the data set that I'm going to train on, and that's the product that I'm going to build, right? Both of those scenarios, I think you could definitely speed up with large language models, right? But at the end of the day, the real sort of velocity question that you're asking comes down to sort of you defining what your ship parameters are in terms of saying what is the accuracy that you're expecting, like how are you measuring accuracy, like whether it be F1 score, whether it be like precision recall, whatever you're measuring, right? Like how are you going to essentially produce a output that aligns with your expectations? And I think the large language model part doesn't change that. That part is still sort of a product manager sort of objective for you to say, how do you optimize, right? Your dev team can then go and pick the right tools for what they want, but at the end of the day, you're still holding them accountable to say like this is the shit part that we're aiming for.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Okay, so the next one from the chat is from Sahar, and then Rashid, you'll be next.
Before they go though, I have a question
Yeah,
for
yeah.
you, Cam. Should I be answering
Oh.
all the questions, or are they are like I feel like there's a variety of like people in the room who've got as much insight as much as I do or more? Like what? Why are we focusing on just me?
I love that.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that out loud, as if I didn't already love you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll ask this next question from Sahar, and then maybe you can provide 2 cents, or we can see if somebody else has. I think that's a great suggestion, so thanks for that. Sahar's question is, I am curious, how is your process changing with cross collaboration outside of your function? And are you getting buy-in from your peers and partners? For example, in SaaS organizations, sales or sales support, customer success teams work closely with product dev, solution architects, and database management. So I think what I'm hearing is, has your maybe with the maybe putting words into Sahar's mouth, with the introduction of AI tools, is it changing how you get buy-in and how you cross collaborate outside of your team?
That's an interesting question. I think I'll give you my opinion on this, and I'm curious to hear if anybody else has a different opinion here. But I don't think it's changed significantly, right? I think the AI tools part doesn't really change. You know, organizationally, we have organizational objectives to say like this is what each of these teams are going to be doing. This, and we know who our aligned teams are in terms of like our product marketing teams, our field support teams, and so forth. And so every sort of quarter we have a review of things, and we sort of like realign things and make sure everybody's sort of singing from the same sheet of music. But other than that, I don't feel like there's a variety of like AI tools that has really changed or impacted that process.
So I have 2 cents on this one. I would say, at least on my team that I have today, AI tools have not influenced how we cross collaborate, or how the product managers on my team get buy-in for anything. However, Sort of my free time this past weekend, I spent some time, and I already told Vinod about this. Excuse me. I spent playing around with the idea of a team librarian. Because one sort of perceived problem that I've seen on my team is that stakeholders outside of product management have interest in the progress and the sort of the state of the state with various things that we may be working on. And it sure would be nice if I'm an engineer, or if I'm the finance guy, or if I'm the CEO, that I had a language model or a bot that I could visit, and I could say, tell me the status of XYZ product, or tell me about the problem that we're trying to solve here, or what is the next thing on the dev plan as it relates to whatever body of work. And results have yet, there's results of how my experimenting went are yet to be disclosed, or yet to be proven. So I don't know if I've created anything of real value yet, but that's my thinking, is that there is an opportunity with some of these tools to maybe smooth out some of the volume of meetings that have to happen to create that buy-in, to keep people abreast of what's happening. And I don't have the solution for it yet, but it is on my mind. The other thing that I'd want to add is just that we talked in, I don't remember which session number, somebody else smarter than me might remember, where we talked a little bit about ProdPad. And I feel like I've talked about this in multiple meetings, and I have yet to adopt it on my own team. But I feel like what I was seeing in that product is a lot of being able to keep stakeholders or individuals outside the product team in sync with what is happening, what is important, how the work aligns with vision, and be able to answer a lot of those questions without having a meeting. And at least for me, that's anything that I can do to have less meetings feels like it's creating efficiency, because there's so much of a lack of focus time, a lack of thinking and heads down time, that I'm looking for any way possible to reduce the meeting load. So I don't know if that helps much, Sahar, but that's my 2 cents. Does anybody else have any experience on this one that they'd want to share before we go to Rashid?
Yeah, I can dive in a little. So when this whole LLM things are happening, a few teams are very skeptical in terms of what we're trying to do with this product. But for some people, this is like a black box or a gray box. They don't know what goes in this and what comes out of this. We work with these business teams to help them understand the type of things that we're doing we're trying to enhance it. For instance, I'll give you an example. There is a team which works on metadata, and there's a lot of fat fingering that happens in that team. So we're trying to use LLM to enhance that area much better. And we showed them like a bunch of MVPs and POCs on how this can be done to enhance the efficiency and eliminate all this fat fingering that happens. And at first 2 meetings, they're very skeptical. And as we're trying to show them the results, they're super happy with how this whole LLM can be used to enhance their team and reduce the workload on their side. It also depends upon the organization and how receptive they are for this kind of new technology and things that the product team is trying to do in their space. That's just my 2 cents, what I have experienced.
Great, thank you.
Fine.
Anybody else on this topic?
So Cam, maybe I can just add one thought to this. So
Sure.
I absolutely agree with you regarding, reduction of meetings. And the way I think about this is we are migrating from a world in which, we had data, right? And a lot of meetings, good managers would say, I don't want opinions, bring the data, right? But people had to go and retrieve the data and bring to these meetings. And then we got to the point where we had dashboards. So the data was immediately available, but you still had to do some digging to really get to the actual knowledge that you're looking for. And now we're getting to this cognition as a service where you can actually ask the model to provide the knowledge that you need in order to make the right decisions. And hopefully that will improve the way organizations work internally, reduce the amount of wasted time, right? Going to meetings, asking questions, because you're going to have the knowledge that you need to make the right decisions. And then the meeting should be limited to really the deep conversations that will drive decisions. So that's just how I think about this.
Love that. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the original question. Let's go to Rashid.
Hi everyone. So this is Rashid, and I think this is my second or first session, and I have an experience in software development almost 20 years in different like languages and platform, mostly on the business applications, and I am an intermediate on the AI. So there are few questions. The first question is I was working on the LLM models, and I found like it's so open area that it's like making things undecisive and complex. So is there any thoughts like we for every domain business area there should be some limitation of uh, inputs and type of inputs? The other question is like in the product management, we are talking about product management, so there is no boundary of sharing the data. And in the product management, we have lot of teams involved, like development teams, marketing team, business, other teams. But how we can limit the data to be accessed across the team, because we don't like the teams only wanted to share a specific amount of data. And the third thing is like here in some teams we discuss about the product manager who is like picking up the all the decisions like how to use the LLM or other model and whatever. Don't we need like a technical role with the product manager who is more responsible related to these technical decision?
Well, I can definitely address that last part, and so I would say 100% yes. And what we harp on my team, which will probably sound very familiar to anybody that has come from a Marty Kagan school of product management, is just that that it is a three-legged stool, and that product cannot deliver anything by itself, nor can engineering, and nor can design. But all three are necessary to understand the problem that we are going to solve, understand why we are solving it, and the best how and what come from a balance between those three kinds of roles. And then I think I don't know that I have enough to know exactly how to answer the first parts of your question, but I would defer to anybody else who might have thoughts.
I don't know. I think the first part of your question was a little bit more about, remind me again, like was it about how do you use the tools? Like when do you use what tools? Was that sort of like what you were trying to ask?
Yeah, so like the limit, I am talking about where we draw the align the limitation for inputs and parameters for these LLM models, especially because they are uh, right now we have a like open flow,
Yeah.
like we have no restriction,
Yeah.
and it like making it undecisive and yeah, so that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I'll give you an opinion. I think it's a sample size of one. So I think this is going to change over time, right? So you know, like any new technology that comes in, that there's going to be sort of like this, you're going to throw the kitchen sink at it, and then eventually you're going to recognize that it's going to be good at certain things and it's not so great at certain things. And so that's also going to happen here. I think right now we're in the kitchen sink phase, and so that's probably what you're seeing.
Okay, yeah, got it, Tushar.
Well, thanks for your question. Jay-Z, you are up.
Oh, perfect timing. Thanks, Justin, for asking the question about the three-legged stool. That was about design and other skill sets, right?
My question was around RAG architecture.
Oh,
Somebody else
well,
asked a question around skill sets, but
okay. I think someone asked a question about skill sets. So, you know, I led machine learning and product for call centers and voice to text and, you know, lots of big data models. We always involve design and this whole brainstorming process of design thinking. So I think Vinod was talking about starting with the limited data set and a very like $1 million big problem. So I was just curious, you know, Vinod or anyone here, if you use brainstorming and kind of like a bottoms up ideation process within AI product management.
100%, right? I mean, like the things that I'm sharing with you today, these are all built on hackathon projects that we've done as teams. These are not like tools that we've sort of built because we think like, you know, like that's an edict to say go build this, right? It's everything that I shared today is output of our team sitting down and saying like, hey, you got a week, we need to solve this problem. What do you think we need to do, right? And so those are the kinds of things that I'm sharing with you here today. And that's why I say these are not intended to be products. These are not intended to be sort of things that Microsoft or anybody else is going to be like, hey, this is a great product. You should all go use it. Like this is just us saying, these are some of the tools we've built in-house in order to do this. But at the end of the day, it's all based off of brainstorming. It's all based off of like scaffolding of ideas, right? So it's like, you know, Cam will come into the room and say like, hey, yeah, you know, I think we should be able to do this. And I'll be like, yeah, that's a great idea. What about, you know, if you did that and this, right? And so that's how we grow.
So it's more of like a free flow, but sometimes you also have these structured hackathons.
Yeah. So what this particular thing, right? Like some of these kinds of things, right? The way we do hackathons is you nominate an idea, right? And you say like, I want to solve this particular problem, and this is what I'm thinking about, and you sort of write a blurb on it, right? So you give everybody on all of the different teams that you work with a blurb to read and determine if they think it's an interesting idea and they want to come work with you. And so then it's a self-selection process at that point, right? So then others will say like, oh, that's interesting. I've been thinking about something similar, but my problem is slightly different. And you know, like as long as you can try to figure out what the scope is of the hackathon that you're, or the product or the thing that you're going to be building during the hackathon, that's all matters, right? So it's a question of, right, just making sure that you can get enough people motivated to solve your problem. If you don't find enough people motivated to solve your problem, that's probably not a problem worth solving for a variety of different reasons, right? So then you have to rethink the question to say like why am I having this problem when nobody else seems to have this problem?
I love it. That's really interesting. I know Facebook does that too, where you have to recruit a certain number of engineers before you can get like a hackathon going. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
No problem.
Love that. Great question. I don't want to say your name incorrectly. Is it Kevin?
It's Kelvin. It's like Kevin, but with a W, Kelvin.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. No worries.
I appreciate your patience. I'm sure I'm not the first person to botch that, but I really wish I would have nailed it right on the first try.
That's okay. So I'm a user experience design student, and I'm trying to figure out ways to use AI for user experience design. And one way is generating ideas. For example, if you're trying to make an app, you can ask it like, what are the potential challenges users might have with this app idea? What are some potential pain points? You still have to test those with actual users, of course, but you can use that as a starting point. But because using AI for idea generation That for me brings up copyright infringement concerns, because if I use an idea that comes from AI, who owns that copyright, and what that is a concern that I have.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
I guess
Go ahead, Vinod.
I don't have a
So
good answer for you. Like I don't know. I don't know. I'm not well versed with.
I'd love to
that.
jump into this one.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would
yeah,
absolutely
so
love to jump into this one.
Go for it, Josh.
So OpenAI and others have come out and said, if you get sued for your use of generated content, we'll actually put our legal team on the case. I can never think of a single commercial example in my lifetime of a company saying, we will assume your legal risk for how you use our product. It's unprecedented. And so it's very clear that we are going to go into a world where you can generate content and you can it's yours and no one's going to sue you for using it. The question is whether you'll be able to copyright it. And so it's like, if you're using it for production work and you're just like making stuff happen, that's great. If you're going to try and write the next, top hit in for the record industry, probably, want to think twice or consult like an industry specific legal representative. But I think, the vast majority of people don't need to worry about infringement as a barrier to jumping in and using AI.
there's also another thing. So when you have created your own content and when you try to, you know, get the copyrights yourself, so before submitting the proposal, any copyright or trademark engine will run a scan in its database for that content. So, and it will generate a report, and only when when there is no matching records, the trademark engine would go ahead and submit the copyright request to the concerned US Public Service Department. So this is what I experienced recently as well when I was trying to copyright my book and also copyright my content and do a trademark for my company. So it runs that extensive search on the existing content. Similar to like when we are registering a domain name, a domain name provider would run a scan in its database in the worldwide servers to look for that particular domain name.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
Yeah, can I
All right.
just add one more thought to that? So I was at an
Oh, sure.
event yesterday, and there was a panel of CIOs, and one of the CIOs had an insight that I thought was really good. So, if you think about a human being, right? So we are born not knowing anything, and then through time we absorb a lot of knowledge through studying, through books and other sources. And so if you think about the copyright for a human being, obviously if you write a book, for example, and you copy several pages from another book, that's a copyright infringement. But if you're using your own words, if you're using your own thinking on things that you've learned over time, that's not a copyright infringement. So you can think about machines in the same way. The machines, obviously, if they repeat, what they've learned word by word, then they might be infringing on copyrights. But if they're not, if it's generation that is just based on the learning from their training, then that does not make sense that would be a copyright infringement. So we're still in the early days of this, and I know there's a lot of authors and others that are going ahead and suing people because of copyright infringements. But I think over time, this is going to settle. I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Thank you.
That was great. Thanks for that addition, David.
Yep.
I want to make sure we cover this question from Chris Cannon, and then I think I'd like to get us to Josh and hear and see his progress on voice flow. So Chris's question, training on the data from the cases, are you also using this data as an input to your features roadmap? I think this is definitely a question for you, Vinod.
Sorry, repeat the question again. Which data from a features roadmap?
She said, Chris said, training on the data. It sounds like she's saying something like that. She understands you're training on data from the cases, but are you also using this data as an input to your features roadmap?
Oh,
I hope
absolutely.
I'm getting this right, Chris.
Yes.
Yeah, and just basically thinking about multiple uses for the same kind of a data set. And is that something that you think about when you do the training? And obviously that's, if you're using the customer cases or problems, that might be somewhere where you are finding out, through simple aggregating and how many of these seem like the same thing, and is that something that we need to address in the product roadmap? So I was just curious if that's another output of that data that you're using.
100%, right? That is absolutely one of the goals, right? Like the goals are threefold, right? So first is we want to reduce our case volume over time. Second is we want to be able to understand what is it the customers are actually using our service for, and where do we want to continue to invest in. So that's critical to answer your essentially your question that you were asking.
Yes.
And the third thing that we're trying to do is really understand from a feature sort of usability perspective, what are the things that we need to build, right? So it's not so much to say like, yes, this is a problem. Like what we're trying to understand is how do we want to solve this problem, right? Like how are customers expecting us to solve this problem, right? And so that's the other aspect of it that is somewhat intangible, but that is also something we're trying to glean out of this data.
Okay. Thanks.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, next, Vinod, thanks again for being here. Please stay and hang out with us.
Yes,
Well done. We really appreciate you.